Hello everyone, welcome back to ProChess India YouTube channel. Today we'll be talking about pawn structures. Before we talk about pawn structures, we need to understand one basic idea. If you want to improve at chess, you must first master your tools. Every piece on the board has its own strengths, weaknesses, idle squares, and typical rules. Pawns control space and create structures. Knights jump into key outposts. Bishop dominates diagonals. Rooks love open files. And the queen becomes powerful either when she's centralized or when the rest of the pieces are supporting the queen. Unless we don't understand how each piece works or how each piece behaves, or how can we maximize or optimize the pieces, we'll always feel lost in the middle game. And this is one of the biggest challenges that we face when we start with chess, that after the opening moves, we don't know what to do next. We develop the pieces, we castle, and then suddenly we are stuck. Which side should we attack? Should I trade my pieces? Or should I play on the queen side? Should I play on the king side? Like, how do I exactly make a plan? And this confusion often happens because many players don't know how to read the position or how to analyze the position. And that's where pawn structures become your best guide. Pawn structure tells you which plan makes sense, where to attack, what to avoid, which pieces need to be traded, and where you place your pieces, basically. And if you understand pawn structures, the game stops feeling random, as we can say it. You will know the direction in which the plan should be made, the purpose behind the moves that we are making. And that's where the importance of pawn structure lies. Now, with this, I will be dedicating this video, at maybe the next one as well, on how do we read pawn structures. So what we'll be doing is we'll be starting with the basic elements of strength and weaknesses about pawns. So generally, what is a weak pawn? So we should understand that a pawn likes to protect another pawn. And if a pawn is not protecting another pawn, it's simply weak. What are the strengths of a pawn? So let's say if a pawn is protected by another pawn, it's good, it's fine. And if a pawn is a passed pawn, then it's very, very strong. Like a passed pawn, as you can see in this position, is the e pawn. So what's a passed pawn? So a pawn that no enemy pawn can stop from queening is simply a passed pawn. When you have a passed pawn, your opponent has to use pieces to block or try to win the pawn, which gives you an attacking potential. In the endgame, passed pawns are especially powerful as your opponent has fewer pieces to stop the pawn from promoting. So in this case, you can see that the e pawn is the passed pawn, and we want to simply push the pawn. But the problem is if I push here, the king will take it. So we start with the move king to f4. The idea is that now we are supporting the pawn advancement. So let's say black plays something like king e6, and then we can play something like pawn e5. King goes to e7. Now we can go king f5. And here, the same pawn will be used as distraction. So basically, a passed pawn can be used for two things. One is to simply promote, if there's a chance to promote it. Otherwise, what we can say that I'll push it to some extent, and black will waste the move in order to capture the pawn. In the meantime, we'll capture all the other guys and make new set of passed pawns. So just to show you a sample line, we can start with this. And now we don't want to push our e-pawn any further. We can just keep taking other pawns. And now we have 4 connected passed pawns. It's very easy to win the game. So now if we go back all the way, so we need to understand a couple of basic elements of the pawn structure. So right now, what I will be saying, we need to focus on 2 basic elements. Number 1 is what's a good pawn. So I'll write it over here. So the logic behind the discussion is a pawn likes to protect another pawn. If that is the case, it's good. If that's not the case, it's bad. Now, what is a weak pawn? So just the opposite of it. A pawn that is not protected by another pawn is a weak pawn. Now, which of the weak pawns can we target or can we attack? So now it's very important how to handle weak pawns, or which pawn can we target. Now, in order to attack a weak pawn, we must understand that the weak pawn should not be able to move forward. It should not be able to advance, okay? So there are 2 important elements when it comes to make plans around the weak pawn. So firstly, you have to check for two things. Number one is the square in front of the weak pawn should be controlled by your side. Your pawn, your pieces should be controlling that square so that the weak pawn cannot make progress. Number two, you should have or can have attackers to put pressure on the weak pawn. So possibility of attack should always be there. Now, this is a very important element to understand regarding pawn structures. And based on this, we'll be trying to understand different kind of pawns. So starting with the passed pawn is really a strength. And if the passed pawn can be pushed, then it's, especially in the end game, as I was saying, that it becomes kind of a match winning scenario for you. Now, in this case, we are playing with the white side. And the idea is already that we are having a pawn majority on the queen side. And if you're having a pawn majority, we should think of creating a passed pawn. And here we see that the opponent has a knight, which is slightly slow in the game. So we know that after b5, ab5, we will have a passed pawn. So we should start with b5, ab5, a6. And the knight cannot really chase us because if you go knight e5, we go a7, knight c6, queen. Something like this. And now we have a queen. And this is completely winning. So now in couple of examples, we are seeing that how passed pawn is just turning out to be a match-winning pawn for us. Now, this is white to play, and you can pause the video for, let's say, 30 seconds and try to come up with a plan. I will continue here. Now, the question is, how do you create a passed pawn? Here you will notice that white has a queen side pawn majority, and black has a king side pawn majority. So we have to generally push our pawn majority to make passed pawn. So I hope you guess the move. The move was c4. And the idea is if the pawn takes, bishop takes, we have a passed pawn on the b file. It is called as a protected passed pawn because the pawn is already protected by my pawn. And protected passed pawns are generally stronger than isolated passed pawns. Why? Because the answer is written over here on the left side. A pawn likes to protect another pawn. And here, let's say they play something like king g7. We go here. King f8, let's say here. They can go something like bishop c6, but we simply go bishop a6, and b7 is just unstoppable. A sample line can be king e7, pawn b7, bishop e7, bishop e7. And now we can just read out and make more passed pawns. Okay, so this is a very important position. Basically, we are trying to think of a way to recapture the knight. White played knight d5, black has captured with the knight. Now there are three choices. One is by the c pawn, other is by the e pawn, and the final choice is by the rook. You can again pause the video for 30 seconds and come up with a decision. So I'll start from here. Obviously, capturing by the e pawn is a typical blunder because you must be able to see that bishop cross c2 is there. So now the important question is, should we capture the knight by the pawn or should we capture the knight by the rook? Now, if you capture the knight by the rook, let's say, like rook cross d5. Now what you're doing is you're keeping the d file open. We see that this particular square is really a very important square for black. So black can read out the knight and keep it on d4. And when I'll be talking about the knights, like for example, right now I'm dealing with pawns. So maybe if we get some time, we'll talk about the knights as well. So knight likes to sit on outpost. So we realize that, okay, knight c6, knight d4 is an important maneuver. And white faces difficult decision after that, that should you tolerate the knight on d4 for too long or should you just capture it? But the problem is if you capture it anyhow, let's say just to make some moves, the moment you start to capture it, they'll be having a passed pawn. So that's that. What should we do? So if you capture by the c pawn here, now when you capture by the c pawn, you must notice that firstly you're controlling the c6 square, so there's no chance of knight c6, knight d4. And the next element is if you've given yourself a passed pawn. And this is a protected passed pawn, so usually it's very advantageous for white. And for that reason, the bishop will always be one of the blockaders and the bishop will be passive. Yeah, this is a positional advantage for white. Let's go for the next one. Okay, now in this case, it's white to play and black is having a very simple idea to just push the pawn and make a queen by playing d1. And generally, we cannot just play average moves. Like, for example, we cannot just play pawn to a5 and try to push our own pawn, or we cannot play something like pawn g5. Now, what should we do? So you have to come up with energetic moves to stop the pawn from queening. Now, energetic moves are generally forcing moves. And forcing moves, you can think in terms of checks, captures, and threats. And here, basically, the promotion square is a d1 square, and it's a white color square. So maybe my bishop can help me out somehow. So firstly, the bishop cannot control the d1 square like this. If the pawn was not there, then okay, I could have played something like bishop c2 immediately. But the pawn is there. Now, how do we solve it? So we start with the check, bishop check. Now, wherever the king goes, we get bishop e3 and we control the square. And then we are having our passed pawn that we can simply push. And not just that, we have another protected passed pawn on the f5 square, and the bishop will be getting overloaded. So just to show you a sample line here again. So let's say I make this, you go here, and let's see, here I just push your bishop, something like bishop d4. And now I can create some distractions, something like this. And the bishop is getting overloaded. If you go bishop f6, I go pawn a7. Let's see, you make a queen, I capture bishop c5. And again, we can see that the bishop is getting overloaded. Whatever they do, we promote in the next one. Black to play. And we have to figure out a way to win this. So again, you can pause the video for 1 minute, I would say, and come up with a winning plan for black. All right, I hope you found the idea. We should start with an energetic move, which is a CCT, or a check capture threat move. We should start with bishop c5. It pins the bishop, so obviously the bishop will take it. Now we have to make a decision. Should you capture by the b pawn or should you capture by the d pawn? Now, generally, whenever there's a recapture happening in the position, it is not an automatic decision. It becomes a strategic decision. So before I go forward, let me explain the 4 types of decision. So Grandmaster Jacob Agard has talked about the practical decision making in chess, how it happens, and he says that there are typically 4 types of decisions a player makes during the course of the game. The first is automatic, when moves are very obvious or forced, like in the opening move. For example, when we play e4, they play e5, and then okay, you already know that you have to play knight f3. You don't really think much. You just simply go knight f3 or bishop c4, something like that. Then comes simple decisions, which are more intuitive and positional in nature, and you don't require any deep calculation. Then comes critical decisions. Now, critical decision is basically the match deciding moment, where the difference between the best move and the second best move is very high. The best move, if you find it, you win the game. Or if you find it, you be in the game. Like, for example, if you're in a losing position, but you have only one move to survive. And if you find that move, it's a critical moment of the game. You can force a draw maybe. Or if you don't find the move, you simply lose. And the other aspect, if you find the move, you will be ending up winning the game. And if you don't find the move, then the game goes on. So that is a critical decision. It happens generally 1 or 2 times in the game. But the decision that happens the most number of times is the strategic decision, where long-term plans, or whenever there's an equal value piece trade involved, should you exchange queens or not? Should you change the pawn structure or not? Whenever these kind of decisions are being made, it is a strategic decision. These can go against intuition and cannot always be calculated fully. So you have to understand, whenever there's a change in pawn structure, you have to focus on that, okay, what kind of benefit are you getting? Or if there is any benefit at all. So here we can see that if you capture by the d pawn, you are creating yourself a protected passed pawn. And if you capture by the b pawn, you're creating yourself a protected passed pawn. But if you capture by the d pawn, we are also giving white passed pawns, the connected passed pawns. And if we capture by the b pawn, now white doesn't have a passed pawn, and we are having a protected passed pawn. Now we can simply play king f6, king e5, and then we can use our passed pawn to either force a zugzwang, or we can just create a distraction. This is completely winning for black. All right, so now we enter the next phase of the discussion. Now we talk about the double pawns. Double pawns are basically 2 pawns on the same file. Generally, there's a difference between double pawn and a cluster. Cluster is basically a combination of a pawn chain and double pawns. So what white is having right now is a cluster because it's a combination of a pawn chain and double pawn. And what black is having on the A file is simply a double pawn. Now, what is the point? So double pawn is actually a weakness because a pawn cannot be protected by another pawn. But clusters are not always weak. Sometimes it's good to have clusters provided you are having clusters in the center. Or if the double pawn weakness is hidden inside the cluster, like in this case, this is a weak pawn which is hidden inside the cluster. So this is good. Another idea of double pawn is that the file just next to the double pawn becomes either semi-open or open. So whenever a pawn moves, the file gets either semi-open or open, depending on the situation. Now, we will see that black has double pawn where white has a cluster, and the double pawn weakness is hidden inside the cluster. So white structure is fine, but black structure is not. So what you can do is you can simply just have a very simple plan to go rook a2, bring the other rook on a1 and start attacking it. You should not exchange your pawn for their pawn because your pawn is already protected and their pawn will find it a bit difficult to hold it. Okay, so here it's white to play, and you can pause the video again for, let's say, 30 seconds to 1 minute and find out a way to continue in this position. It's a very interesting idea that whenever you start with any position, you must try to look for weaknesses. So here you can see the pawn is hanging, the other pawn is hanging, and the king is exposed on the 6th rank. So the first move that should come to the mind is a forcing move, which is a check capture threat move. So rook to d6 is a check. It's not just a check, it's also a double attack. So if the king goes to g7 or g5 for that matter, we can just simply take the pawn. Now here, black is forced to play rook e6. And now again, the decision to take the rook or not take the rook is a strategic decision. Whenever there's an equal value piece trade involved, you must ask yourself, is there any benefit that I am getting with the trade of rooks? So here, rook e6, fe6, black will have double pawns. So it favors white to give double pawns to black. And now we have a very clear idea to play king f2, king e3, king e4. So just to start the moves now, king e3, king f5. And now what we can do is we can just simply make a distraction technique by creating some passed pawns because we are having a pawn majority on the king side, 3 versus 1. So we can simply play something like h3. Idea is to play g4. Let's say they try to make some of their own threats. We can go g4, takes. And now again, it's very important. How should you take? So, and okay, this is completely winning for white, but again, you should take by the f pawn because now you're creating yourself connected passed pawns. Let's say they go here, you bring your king in, they go here, and now very quickly we can force the zugzwang by playing something like h4 and whatever they do. And now maybe they are trying to create their own set of passed pawns. Now, one thing you should remember in 3 versus 3, if you're able to form something like a reverse triangle, opponent can never make a passed pawn. Okay, something like this formation, if you can remember like this, opponent can never make a passed pawn in this. So whatever pawn they push here, we'll simply take 2 times. If they push something like this, we can go g5, it goes here. Now we can collect all the pawns. And this is completely winning. So here black has played the move pawn c6. And again, you have to pause the video and you have to figure out what should you do with the knight. Some of you might think that, okay, we can go for something like knight c7 check. And maybe you might be expecting them that they will take and then you will be going for rook cross d8. But you have to see that, okay, after knight c7 check, what if they don't take? What if they simply play king e7? And now the knight is trapped on c7 and it will be lost soon. So here it's not really important to go knight c7 check. There's another way we can handle this position in white's favor is to play knight f6. Now again, it's an equal value piece trade involved. Whenever there's an equal value piece trade, we must ask ourselves, what is the benefit we are getting? The answer to that is we are giving them double pawns. Now you will notice that this is a cluster, but this time in the cluster, the weakness is actually not inside the not inside the cluster, but it is rather outside. So it's more exposed. Now, because we have created double pawns, so time to attack. So we can simply play bishop h4. Now, just to make the point, if you simply play a random move like king g1, okay, if you're not careful about the idea that, okay, it's important to attack the move f6 pawn right away by playing bishop h4. Let's say you play something like king g1. Now, here, black can maybe figure out a defense because even this pawn is weak. Black can play something like rook d4. And let's say you play something like bishop h4 now, simply king e7. And here I feel, okay, after king e6, black is fine. So what you have to do is after knight f6, gf6, we have to directly play bishop h4. The difference, let's say if they play this. Now there's this very simple tactical idea that we can do here, which starts with bishop takes pawn check. And okay, this is completely winning here. Okay, let's go back. Let's say instead of playing king e7, let's say now they go rook d3, we can capture by the rook. And now if they play king e7, we have rook f3. And after rook f3, the game is in white's favor. White is better here. We're going to win the pawn and later on, hopefully the game. Okay, so in this position, it's white to play. Black has played the move knight to e5. And the typical idea is to attack the pawn on g4. Again, you can pause the video, take some time and figure out what you should do. So if you thought of playing h3, then you are just like, we are thinking in a kind of a passive manner. We have to come up with more interesting ideas here. Now we can see there's a geometry in the position that both the knight and the king are on a same diagonal. So we can play something like bishop c3. And if they play king g8, now again, we have to think of this decision. Should we take it or should we not take it? And now from the experience of previous examples, we can realize that yes, taking on e5 gives double pawns, and now we can just simply start attacking it. Something like king e3, king f7, king e4, king f6, and now just simply playing for our pawn majority, making some passed pawns. Okay, so here we have to decide how do we capture the bishop. Should we capture by the pawn? Should we capture by the bishop? Again, it's a strategic decision because we are thinking of equal value piece trade. And generally, no equal value piece trade is equal. It always benefits one side more than the other. And you have to figure out how do you take. So again, you can pause the video for 30 seconds, think of some ideas, and then you can see the video. Okay, so the correct move is to play for a cross b4. Now here we are doubling our pawns, but as we can see, it's part of a cluster. The weakness will be inside the cluster, which will be the b pawn, b2 pawn specifically. So it's fine to give yourself a cluster like that. But what we have created is a backward pawn. And the square right in front of the backward pawn is in white's control. So attacking the backward pawn will be very easy. Now what you have to do is you have to just get your pieces in, like rook a2, bring the other guy in, and just start putting pressure. And now what will happen, the moment you will start putting pressure on their backward pawn, their pieces will become passive. So right now the threat is to go rook a6, so they'll have to go rook a8. And now we simply go rook a2. Let's see, they bring the knight in the defense. We go rook a1, rook fa1 actually. They go knight b8. And now black pieces are passively placed. And they're tied to the defense of the a6 pawn here. And white has advantage. If you capture the bishop by the bishop, now white doesn't have any clear advantage here because, okay, the a6 is a weak pawn, but are we able to target it? No. So it's not really a target right now as compared to the previous case. Okay, so black's last move was bishop cross e3, and we have to figure out how do we recapture the bishop. Now again, you can pause the video. I'm going to start anyways. Now the correct way is to capture by the f pawn, giving yourself a cluster, but again, we can see that the double pawn weakness is hidden inside the cluster, so it's good. Apart from that, the cluster is controlling important squares. One is the d4 square, where the knight can never jump. Not just that, we can see now the queen has a very clear path to participate in the attack. The f7 pawn is already pinned. It's also underprotected. The rook is now getting into the open file. So the typical idea is to play queen h4, knight g5, knight d5, and putting pressure on the f7 and h7 pawns. Okay, so in today's session, we understood about the passed pawns and the double pawns. If you like the video, do let me know in the comments. We'll make another video on isolated pawns, backward pawns. And hopefully now when you'll be playing chess, you will be thinking about pawn structure, and this will help you to make plans in the game. That's it from my side for today. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.